Halito, and welcome to Native Chalk Talk, a podcast by natives for all. Here we're keeping our Native ancestors' stories and history alive, while also sharing with you our Native culture, traditions, and more. I'm Rachel Youngman, a Choctaw originally from Anadarko, Oklahoma. I hope you'll enjoy this journey with me as we learn from our Native American guests. And I hope you'll do me a favor. Feel free to like and share these episodes. I so appreciate it. Yakoki.
Nobody hands any jobs out in the NFL. You have to earn it. There was a small opportunity to make it. I just held to, I've got this one opportunity to try for this dream. And in my mind, it was nothing to lose and everything to gain. I was probably about a month and a half, 2 months away from totally hanging it up, and went to the last camp and had some looks and had an opportunity to come work out in Kansas City. And the rest was history.
See and share our stories at togetherwe'remore.com.
Buckle up, y'all, because today you're coming along on a road trip adventure with my cousin Cheryl and me as we follow our family roots across Choctaw Country. And yes, there will be a Sonic Dr. Pepper with vanilla stop along the way. This journey took us to a few spots, but especially to the property of Choctaw Jonathan Watson, where Choctaw Chief Mushulatubbee once lived. Chief Mushulatubbee is one of Cheryl's ancestors, and as we travel, we'll weave together a few conversations about the people who came before us, our family members who built their farms, homes, and businesses in many of the very towns we visited. Now, my great-grandmother Ella's mother was Rosa Coley, and Rosa had many siblings, including David Coley, which is Cheryl's great-grandfather, and that shared Coley, that's Coley, in case there's any Coleys out there listening, that Coley lineage has given us endless conversations and text threads over the years about our family history. And honestly, Cheryl and I are both ancestry nerds, and I'm so grateful for every story and discovery that we share together. This episode is a little different than most. I actually recorded it almost 2 years ago, and piecing it all together has been its own kind of adventure. So, what you'll hear is a bit of a beautiful hodgepodge of history, laughter, family memories, and hearts. And these adventures are not yet complete. We still have many more of our ancestral stomping grounds to visit and hundreds more stories to tell as we go. But this, I guess you could say, was the first step toward recording our family history. As I'm recording this, Cheryl has just undergone surgery today, in fact, and is courageously winning a health battle. So I'm dedicating this episode to my incredible cousin, Cheryl. She is one of the kindest souls that I know, deeply rooted in faith and a fierce keeper of our family stories. Cheryl, I love you, and I'm so proud of your strength and proud to call you my cousin and my friend. This one's for you, girl. I'd like to encourage you, if you're listening to this series, to hop on over to YouTube where you'll see videos and visuals that may be hard to picture if you're listening. Just go on over to YouTube and search Native Chalk Talk and Adventures in Choctaw Country. We kicked off our adventure as I drove from Chickasha, Oklahoma, and Cheryl made the trip over from Fort Smith, Arkansas. We met up at Shelly's Stigler Café. Y'all, if you ever find yourself near 504 East Main Street in Stigler, Oklahoma, you've got to stop by. We went straight for the buffet, piled high with good old-fashioned home cooking, and spent our lunch catching up and mapping out our day. Of course, it didn't take long before the conversation turned to our favorite topic, family history. I've always loved the stories Cheryl tells about her family who lived in what's called Cooper Bend. And that land is still in Cheryl's family today. The Coleys and the Coopers and the Kings were all friends and a very tight-knit community out that way. Someday, Cheryl and I will make an entire episode roaming that area and telling all the beautiful stories of Cooper Bend. So tell us about Cooper's Bend and your family living there and all that.
Well, my family, it's the only place I ever knew them living other than when my grandparents moved into Kenna, Oklahoma. My mother grew up out there until she was probably about 14 years old.
Yeah.
My aunt was born there, and they had lived in their grandparents' home The interesting thing was Choctaw tradition. It's a matriarchal society. And so when the woman died in the home, the man moved out. And interesting that when my great-grandmother passed away, my great-grandfather moved out, built his own home,
Okay.
remarried a little while later, and gave that home to my grandmother. And that's where my grandma and grandpa lived. And my mom grew up there. And I find that interesting that they sort of adhered to that Choctaw tradition. And that would have been in I think Lavina Coley passed in 1934. My mom was just a week old.
So this would have been early 1900.
Yeah, early 1900.
And you mentioned to me earlier that Cooper's Bend, the land they lived on there, those were their land allotments.
Those were their land allotments. There were, at one point, I think when you left and went south of Kenna, all the way around for several miles, it kind of made a loop around. And all of that was Cooper land at one point. And Israel Cooper lived in there. A lot of the Coopers lived in there and had their land allotments, and you just heard stories about them growing up. And then, of course, as the people and the older ones passed, it was left to descendants. And consequently, what's there now is the little Shady Point Cemetery, where a lot of the older ones are buried.
And ironically, I had gone to that cemetery.
That's right.
And then I had seen flowers on some of the graves. And I found out many years later that you were the one putting the flowers.
My mother and I went.
Later.
I went and I did that. I kept up that tradition most of it was because my grandmother, I went out there as a child. My grandmother, she always decorated those graves. Always. Never failed to go there. And matter of fact, sometimes she would eat when I was little, but didn't have all the artificial flowers that they had today. So she made paper flowers. And she would make these paper flowers, and we would take them out there and decorate those graves. And of course, I heard stories about them having dinner out there, and they'd have a preacher out there, and they had an all-day visitation with people, the friends, family, and they'd have a preacher and singing all day, and then they'd stop and have dinner, and everybody came out that day and decorated their graves, and they just had like a big party out there in celebration of and honoring their loved ones and ancestors.
It's such a lesson for us in honoring
certainly
after
now, but when you go back into Choctaw history, they periodically they would have they called them cries, and they would take a certain period of time and they would have what they called a cry, and it was they would gather, have a dinner, that they actually cry, and it was a very solemn, sad occasion. But then when they were through with their cry, then they had their dinner and they danced and partied and whatever. So, but it was their traditional way of honoring the ancestors, and so you have to wonder. Some of this holdover for Decoration Day and going to the cemeteries and holding their rituals that they did at the cemeteries is left over from that. Yeah. So you just kind of wonder from time to time, what do we have today that's left over from these old traditions? We think we don't have very much, but maybe we have more than we do.
That's so true.
They just farmed, they were just people that farmed the land and lived off their land. And they did come into a little money when the government paid back what they owed them to Israel Cooper. And he was called a wealthy landowner. I don't know what that meant.
Very prominent, right? With the school board and
it was. I don't know with the Indian schools. And like I said, I don't know what all that meant. And but he actually hired somebody. They called it as an overseer to oversee his property and his money and everything and help him with that. And they took his money, so he lost almost everything he had except his land. And of course, that was always just one thing that my grandparents said to me: don't ever give up the land. Don't, if you've got your land, you can always go back there and live. Even as when I was in high school, back in the 70s, my grandparents would look at me and say, don't ever give up your land. Really, you can go there. If you need to, you can come there and live, and you can make it. You can survive. Because that's what they knew was survival. And, these were poor people just making a living. They had a good life. They really did. Even though they didn't have much financially, but they had a good life, and they had a lot of friends and a lot of family, and people were always stopping in and visiting. And it's just, I look back on it, and people love to come there and visit. And even your Ella and Gaston and Harry, and Ella and Creeley. They would come there and stay several days with them. And
in Cooper's Bend?
No, not in Cooper's Bend. By that time, they had moved to Kenna.
Okay.
And, I don't know that they might have come to Cooper's Bend.
But even Kenna was the town where Cooper's Bend located.
Yeah, but they came there to visit.
I didn't know that.
And they knew each other well. And
That was.
I was over there a while back, probably 4 months ago. And Bill and I drove in, and I was disoriented. I thought, this doesn't look right to me. And there was a huge cedar tree that was there. And there was always on the left as you pulled into the pasture land.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, Bill said, are we on the right road? And I said, I think so. And we went down a little bit, and I said, this just doesn't look right. Well, somebody had come in and cut that cedar tree. And that cedar tree had been there since I was a child. And it was my landmark. But
We did that.
no, who knows?
And that was your landmark.
Yep.
That's
That was my landmark.
That cedar tree.
It's like, what was my tree? Get my tree back. But, that tree had been there for 50, 60 years that I know it. I know, broke my heart.
People need to stay out in the land.
That's right. Stay on it.
Well, thanks for sharing the things
Well,
about
you're
Cooper's
welcome.
Bend, and I can't wait to see more of it.
Okay.
Okay, so after we left Shelly's Stigler Cafe, we of course took a pit stop at Sonic.
On
First, we
Route
have to stop
44,
and get a Sonic drink.
Dr. Pepper with vanilla and extra vanilla.
Then it was off to Tamaha, where some of the Choctaw who were removed from Mississippi off-boarded a ferry into what became the little town of Tamaha, which means town in Choctaw, by the way. There's a little jail in Tamaha that we took pictures of, and then we sought out the exact location as to where the Choctaws actually landed off of the ferry. To discover the actual spot, we talked to one of the locals, Kelly Brannon, who happened to be Choctaw. And I kid you not, we just ran into him and started asking him questions as he was walking his dogs. Anyway, he showed us the way. So you said that down here.
In that area, right?
Really? And then you said there's some kind of battle?
My wife can tell you more about it than I can.
Well, I'll definitely give her a call, Ben. Thank you for your help. Now, it also just so happens that his wife, Tanya, is the town historian, or I've proclaimed her to be, but a lot of people do come to her for the history of Tamaha. And she shared more about Tamaha in season 9, episode 4. So be sure to check that out too, y'all. You'll learn a lot. It's very interesting. So this is it. This is where they came up, according to my new friend there, where they landed and then came into their new home in Indian territory. It is so quiet out here and so peaceful.
We when we were back up that way, you could see the main part of the river. I just think about the people that got off those boats, how terribly sad they had to have been, because there was so much loss that they'd experienced. And then were they fearful? You had to wonder, because everything was unknown to them. And what did they have to start over with? Our government did not do a good job at providing for them. So you know, they knew that they were going to have to plant their corn and just start all over.
Right.
And I just, I think about there's, thousands of them, hundreds of them came through here to this little area.
So we went.
Yeah, it's Tamaha Ferry Landing at Tamaha, Oklahoma. And if you went east on the river, you'd come to Fort Smith, just down the river. Yeah. This is the Arkansas River, and this is just backwater of the Arkansas River, a little cove called Tamaha Landing. You could travel all the way to the Mississippi on the Arkansas River, just by going downstream. One of the things I'm reading, and I've begun reading over the last several years, are the missionaries. There were a lot of missionaries that were brought in to Christianize the Choctaws. And so the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, um, groups like that were brought into Mississippi or allowed into Mississippi by the Choctaws to come in and educate, build schools and educate them. And they set about taking away all of the traditional customs. A lot of those missionaries came with them when they came to, or several of them came with them when they came into Indian Territory, and they began to build churches and just help them. But they had a lot of writings. They wrote back to their the boards that they reported to. They reported on what they were doing, how the Indians were reacting to whatever was going on at the time, and certainly when they came into Indian Territory, they had to account for what they were doing over here as well. Alexander Talley, he's one of them that has an autobiography, and you can read some of the accounts of his. And then, of course, those reports to the Methodist Church, that gives you sometimes they're kind of vague. Sometimes it tells, a little more detail. And then, I don't know, there was just different ones that were missionaries to the Choctaws. And it's an interesting read to me to learn about what these people saw. And Alexander Talley, he was called a white Choctaw. They actually called him a white Choctaw because he just lived among them and just documented a lot of their behavior and customs. And if these people had not documented so much, we wouldn't know what they did, because there wasn't much written down back then. But I think this is just, when you just stop and just see how peaceful it is, it's like there's a sense of peace here.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this series.
Thanks for listening to Native Chalk Talk. Be sure to join our community on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check us out at nativechalktalk.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. You're going to love it. Yakoki. Thank you, my friends.